What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Well, this is a brand new thing, actually, so not welcome back, but welcome all of you, and thank you for listening and watching to the very first PSR podcast. Episode 1 features a very, very talented individual, someone who I've been watching and listening to and enjoying their content for a long time, and we have him here in the flesh, in person, and that is Hoffman Tactical. How are you, Tim Hoffman?
Very good, thank you. Welcome to the show, everyone. This should be a very interesting thing, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Yes, I'm extremely excited.
Yeah, me too.
Before we get into the conversation, though, I got to thank KAK Industry for being the channel sponsor for PSR. KAK Industry is based out of Albany, Missouri, right here in the good old US of A, and they make all the dang AR parts you could ever want and more. If you want to get 10% off your order from KAK Industry, never ever use the code PSR. Would never suggest that, right, Tim?
Never.
Okay.
Definitely not.
With that said, Tim Hoffman, welcome. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, thank you for having me on PSR. So I design firearms. I mainly the AR-15 lower receivers and AR pattern lower receivers. So that is basically what I do in a nutshell. I do a lot of 3D printing stuff. I have a YouTube channel where I do content on 3D printing firearms and 3D printing. And it kind of, expands from there. But that's kind of the heart of it, designing firearms that are intended to be 3D printing.
Give me a little bit of background on your introduction into this space. Like, how did you get into it? When was that, and how did that happen?
Yeah, so I was doing some firearms-related stuff that wasn't related to 3D printing, and some textile stuff, some little covers for hearing protection, stuff like that. And then I decided that I had seen a couple other people who were using 3D printing to make different items, not firearms, but other things, firearms-related accessories, successfully that actually worked. So I had never really taken 3D printing seriously, but then I saw that, so I thought I might as well get a 3D printer. And that was back early 2020, so before the big boom in 3D printed guns. So I wasn't really aware of the 3D printing guns at that time, unfortunately, but I got a 3D printer anyway, and then I just started printing some firearms-related stuff, and then I got into 3D printing lowers just as an experiment, and then I kind of took it from there.
When was that you first got into it?
I got my first printer February 1, 2020.
Okay, wow, February 1, 2020. So you mentioned this boom that happened. So what was it like during that time, if you could describe like the 3D printed gun scene?
So before, really, I would say for me it was around, maybe it was later, it was the fall of 2020 is where things kind of like really started taking off. A lot of people got involved. We had a lot of newer designs just started coming out. Prior to that, there wasn't really a lot on the internet. There was very little content on it. There was some Glock frames out there. There was a couple very poorly designed AR-15 lowers out there, non-reinforced, very fragile. And that was really about it. There was some niche work done on some stuff, obviously all the way back to like 2013. There's been 3D printing guns have been a thing that have been in the news, but they've never really been very practical, or they were never they're not mainstream now, obviously, but they weren't at all in any stream up until 2020. So online looking for files, it was very hard to find anything when I first got in early 2020. That was kind of what things looked like at that time.
Interesting. So I got into it probably not until around 2021, late 2020, early 21. What do you think it was that allowed for that kind of explosion in the popularity of them? What do you think it was?
That's a good question. There was the FGC9 was released in there. I think that was big. That was something that was in development kind of quietly in the background, I think, for some time, and there was other projects as well. But I think that had a lot to do with it. And with that release, people really saw the potential of it. But other than that, I'm actually not really sure. Like, I got involved pretty independently and just started doing lowers. And it just happened to be mid-2020 I was doing that. And then I know that Ivan was released several lower. He released his U-bar lower or the original U-bolt Vanguard
Yeah.
around that time as well. And then Chairman Wan started doing his Glock frames. And it all kind of coincided around a similar time. And then those files became accessible, and that got a lot of people involved. So I think between the FGC9, the AR lowers, and the other designs that just kind of happened to coincide around that time. Why they were all mid-2020, I don't really know. That's kind of an interesting coincidence.
Interesting. And had you heard much about 3D printed guns before?
No, I actually, when I started designing AR lowers, my first AR lower, the only 3D printed gun I was aware of was actually the Liberator, just because I'd seen it in the news, heard about it way back in 2013. So I knew they existed because I'd seen it. I think it was on Drudge Report. I just saw a photograph of it. And I remember way back then, that's a decade ago now.
Yeah.
I didn't think very much of it. I was like, okay, who cares? But that was really all I had known about. And then I decided I wanted to print an AR lower. That was just one of the things I wanted to try with a 3D printer. And when I looked for files, I couldn't find anything that was, let alone strong enough, but anything that was even printable accurately. It was really, I did find a couple files kind of in random places on the web. This is kind of before people started using Odyssey. So that wasn't really a thing.
Well, it was Keybase right before Odyssey.
Yes. That is where everyone was, but that's pretty esoteric.
Yeah.
And I did actually get on Keybase. I didn't ever get any files there. I got on just before they got booted. So,
Yep, same.
Yeah, just before they got booted, and then I was not active over there, really. I hopped on there, kind of checked it out, and then they moved because Keybase booted them off.
Gotcha. A little bit of background on my first seeing your content. I think I first came across it on YouTube somehow. The algorithm recommended one of your videos or something, and I remember looking at it. I mean, you probably had under 10,000 subscribers when I first discovered
If
you.
that was back in 2020, it would have probably been closer to like 1,000.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
under, yeah.
So it feels like I've been along with this this journey with you, and you'll probably be watching this podcast to all the listeners and viewers right now after our video drops on your Orca designed AR.
Yes.
So it's been a dream of mine to collab with you. So I'm honored to have you not only on the podcast, but to film a video that we did today, and we're going to shoot some more tomorrow. Yeah. Hopefully 50 cal stuff.
It's been a lot of fun. It's really cool shooting together, having you down. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I remember watching your stuff and being like, wow, like how old is this kid? Because I think you're kind of youthful. Enthusiastic, yeah. I would just say very focused too. I think you come across as being extremely just driven in what you're doing. And I think that's one of the things that really just emanated from all of the videos that I saw from your content. I was like, wow, this kid is determined to, and I know you're not a kid, you're a man, obviously. But yes. I was looking at you like, this is a kid, this is a young guy, and he's like doing all of these designs himself, and he's just running this YouTube channel himself and testing them out, and like seems like he's having a lot of fun, but is also extremely dedicated and focused. So that was my perception of your stuff.
Yeah, so I always try to be very enthusiastic in videos because enthusiasm breeds enthusiasm. So that's always really good. And yeah, getting a successful lower. Once I kind of started off as just a little side project, but once I started, I was like, I need to make this work. So that was a really big focus of mine for a while, was getting that lower running reliably. And I think I experimented. Really took about a year of experimentation until earlier spring of 2021. I finally released my first super lower, which I still have a very similar. My current lower is a very similar to that first one.
So that was really the breakthrough in the design.
Yeah, that was really all the big improvements were done on that guy.
So I remember watching your early videos of you testing AR lowers and doing push-up tests and throwing them, and I remember you having them. They would snap after like a certain amount of push-ups, or they would snap after throwing it a certain amount of times, or if it landed in a weird way.
Yeah, so I kind of started doing that just before the super lower, and that's kind of part of what precipitated me doing the super lower. It was a couple of things that precipitated me doing the super lower. So all my early lowers weren't reinforced with any metal in the buffer tower. They were just designed to be printed as is, and they held up pretty good. But the push-up test was actually kind of a standard which Ivan developed. As far as I know, that's where I first heard it.
But if you're not familiar with Ivan, this is Ivan the Troll, aka Navi Go Boom. He is also a very big 3D printed gun developer designer.
Yeah, and he's done a lot of really interesting stuff, including several AR lowers, and he developed the push-up test, which if you're not familiar with that is basically it's you put one hand on the stock, you put one hand on the handguard, and then you do push-ups kind of with using the rifle as a link between you and the ground with a pistol grip against the ground. And what that does is it puts a lot of downwards stress or a lot of downwards force on the buffer tube, which tries to break off the buffer tower. And that somewhat simulates the forces the gun experiences while it's firing. And that was kind of like a good way of judging buffer tower strength. And
no magazine, though, obviously.
No magazine, because that kind of, I mean, you could do push-up tests off the
purpose,
magazine,
though.
But
it doesn't
balance well. You really want to go off that pistol
buffer
grip.
tower. Wow. Okay. What would your goal be in doing this? And maybe that's changing. I don't know. I'm just curious what your goal is.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I first started, it was really just a fun project I could share on YouTube that I thought people would be interested in. And then I kind of went as that until it really became my most popular thing I was doing. So it's what people wanted to see. So I really started moving into that, really to help grow the YouTube channel. And I really enjoy doing it myself. And then after that, I started doing the super lower. It's just now it's become a more serious kind of developing distributed weapons that anyone can print, and trying to make that as accessible and as effective as possible.
Awesome. So would you call yourself a firearms designer at this point?
Yeah, I think I would. Yeah.
Definitely. What has been the most surprising thing about going on this journey of doing firearms design?
That's a tough one. Surprising.
Or what has been the most kind of thing that maybe you didn't expect?
The popularity of it. I think that would probably be it. I would never have expected to be here actually, doing this. So
yeah. So
it's 3D printed firearms have now become a thing, and I just didn't really expect that.
Yeah. And even now, people might look at it as being a niche thing, which it might still be, but it's grown so much in the past 2 years.
It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. Yeah, it's really quite amazing.
Let's talk about 3D printed firearms in general, because they're obviously a hot topic, a controversial topic.
Yes.
Very controversial. And we've both experienced this with YouTube giving us lots of strikes.
Oh, yes.
And both you and I have had to remove videos ourselves, and we've gotten videos removed by YouTube.
And not just a few, lots of them. So.
Lots. Yeah. So how do you feel about what the world thinks about it? And like, does that change how you move and
So other than the way I navigate social media platforms, not really. But to be honest, I don't really know how most people think about it. I think a lot of people just don't know it even exists. I think that's kind of probably the norm for most people. And then there are obviously some politically driven organizations and people who adhere to that. There's those people, but I think most people probably just don't know enough about it to have any opinion.
Yeah, I get that. When you see one of your designs on an evidence table that's been like seized or something, how does that make you feel? Yeah,
so the first thing that I'm a little upset that most of those cases, the criminal, in quotes, that was, insert air quotes there, the criminal that was arrested for possessing those items, in most cases, they aren't really a violent criminal or anyone bad. Most cases I've seen, they were arrested just for manufacturing those firearms peaceably at home, and I think that's a huge problem. So that's definitely a little bit upsetting. And then other than that, I do think it's interesting that you can actually, your guns are actually out there. People actually making them. But I would say that the former reaction is probably my primary one.
Yeah. So a lot of people maybe don't know this, but you can tell how many times a thing's been viewed or downloaded. I think it's viewed maybe in Odyssey.
I think it's views on Odyssey.
It's views, okay. But you have your own download counter, right? You did for a while.
I did for a while, and then I just moved everything over to Odyssey primarily.
Gotcha.
It's just more secure that way.
Now, before you moved it though, how many downloads did you have your AR super low?
So probably somewhere in. That's actually a great question. Actually, at this point, 10,000.
Okay.
It was somewhere in that. The problem was we ended up basically getting a denial of service attack, and that really messed up. We were targeted by a server, and they downloaded many thousands of times, and that to try to they shut the website down for a little while. But yeah, it was somewhere in the range of like 10,000 for the super lower. Might have been 12,000. It was up there somewhere.
Getting back to the evidence table thing, I'm curious, like what have been some? I know it doesn't have to be your design, but I know there's been some very memorable scenarios in which 3D printed guns have showed up on evidence tables and news clippings that I've seen. It's kind of always shared in the 3D printed gun community when it happens. I know there's certain designers that are more apt to share about or just talk about it than others, but I feel like, was there one in New York that they seized? There was an evidence table one in New York. I think maybe it either had a Glock frame or it was maybe your AR lower. I can't fully remember.
There's been several in New York, I believe.
Yeah.
Mostly Glocks. I think I may have had one where the person in question who was apprehended for possessing them, I think he had some eye lowers and he had a Glock frame. I think that's the one where he shot his hand, I think, with one of the Glocks.
Yeah, that one.
That's probably the most memorable one, I would say.
Oh, I remember that. I do remember that. That was on the news, and they did a whole little story.
That's what I remember the best. I think it was a real young guy.
Yeah.
And he just made a mistake, shot himself. He was not a criminal or anything. He was just a hobby he did.
Yeah.
And, living in New York, he didn't have proper firearms education, unfortunately. One of the many downsides of strict gun control. And, he hurt himself. And then I think the police got involved, and then they searched his place, found everything, including I think one of my lowers, and a bunch of Glock stuff. I actually don't know what happened to that.
Speaking of which, tell us a little bit about your business.
Yeah, so Hoffman Tactical, I actually started that before getting into 3D printing. That was back in October 2019, October area. So I just wanted to try to do something businessy, something self-employed. And, I was working a part-time job at the time, and I wanted to get into some sort of, self-employment. So I started Hoffman Tactical, and I started the YouTube channel then, and I started doing some I think it was, I was making a textile. They were fabric covers for hearing protection to keep them dry. Pretty cheesy product. But I did that for a while. That was an interesting experience. And then didn't sell hardly any.
You got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah. So I did that for a while. That's kind of where Hoffman Tactical came from. Nowadays, I sell parts kits for my designs. So all of my designs have, they use a few different common hardware parts. And then I just sell all those parts, the hose clamp and all that stuff in a convenient kit, as well as AR lower kit. So that's what I do now. So I do design work, and then I sell parts kits.
So to the people that might not be familiar with like what a parts kit is, it's just the components you need to finish the lower receiver. You don't actually sell anything that is a lower receiver. It's just parts. It's like a trigger component.
Basically, it's basically like spare parts is the best way to think about it.
Yeah.
But they're just the small hardware components, and exactly, trigger, little pins, springs, all that stuff that is easier sourced in a kit than separately is what I put in the kits. Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit about your designs specifically because of the hardware element. Tell us a little bit about your use of hose clamps and like the design of the lowers
Yes,
themselves.
absolutely. So first of all, to all the viewers out there, you either need to embrace the hose clamp or be left behind. But yeah, so I use on my lowers, I actually use a hose clamp. It's just a worm drive hose clamp around the buffer tower, and that basically it transfers the stresses from the top area of the buffer tower down to the lower area, and also holds the layers together, which are two separate things, and that makes it a whole lot stronger. It allows the 3D printed plastic parts to the load is evenly distributed to all of the plastic, basically, and that makes it so much stronger rather than having a stress concentration. So I use that in my lower receivers, and then on the new Orca design, it's used in a similar way, but it's used to hold in the clips which attach the handguard and stock onto the receivers.
Gotcha. So getting back to the lower part, so you make a design for AR-15, but you also make one for LR-308, correct?
Yes, yeah. So I have an AR-15 lower, and then an AR-9 lower, which is very similar, just as an AR-9 magwell, and then I have the AR-15's big brother, which is the LR-308, and it's just a bigger, longer, chunkier lower that is designed to fit LR308 uppers, so you can fire 6.5 Creedmoor and 308 and
Nice.
all of those calibers.
There's one sitting right behind you.
There is.
That's
yes.
the one that I printed.
Yeah. It's right up there or something. Yeah, it's right up
Yeah,
right up there.
and then there's one right behind you that's the older version that
Yes.
you dislike.
Yeah, that's my original version of the 308.
Yeah.
Which it works, but it's not perfect. So the new one had a lot of improvements.
You've come quite a ways since just designing your first lower. Tell me about this latest project, the Orca.
Back last year, so earlier 2022, I decided I wanted to do an AR upper, a 3D printed upper, just because it's a fun project. So that's kind of where the Orca originated. So the Orca is I call it a fully 3D printed AR-15. That upsets a lot of people, but it's 3D printing as many of the major components of an AR-15 as possible. So basically, obviously, we 3D print the lower, which is the important part, and then it prints the upper, the handguard, the stock, as well as some of the internal parts, such as the buffer tube and castle nut. The buffer tube, castle nut, end plate on the stock area, those were all eliminated and replaced by plastic parts. And then on the front end, the barrel nut is replaced by plastic parts. There's a plastic barrel mount, so it reduces the number of parts needed a lot, actually. So it prints all the exterior parts and some of the internal parts of the AR.
Wow, and what kind of printer are we talking when you print this kind of design?
Ender 3, Bamboo Lab P1P, just any normal
commercial
printer.
3D printer.
Yeah. It's
and
not
PLA.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
PLA. We just ran the PLA guy today.
Yes, we did.
We actually ran him too hard, and started getting some malfunctions due to softening plastic. After we didn't count, but a couple hundred rounds, a few hundred.
If you're not
rounds.
melting a little plastic on the range day, you're not going hard enough. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you also have a design that utilizes nylon as well, right?
Yeah, so you can print it from anything that you want to, obviously. So PLA is a lot easier to print; it's lower cost. But if you were able to print it, you can use. I use carbon fiber nylon is what I used. It's the Polymaker PA6 carbon fiber nylon, and that guy is extremely solid and holds up just fine to many hundreds of rounds. So
amazing. So if you wanted a little bit more durability, that's how you do it.
If you want a primary, very solid rifle, that does it.
Tell me a little bit about this aesthetically, because if you're just listening to the podcast, not watching it, the Orca, I'll show it right now on the screen, but it has got a very unique design and very unique aesthetic. Tell me about this aquatic theme with the Orca. How did you come up with this? Where did it come from? Where did you start?
Yeah, so it kind of grew organically, I would say, from the beginning. So it probably, the origins of that is probably from my Gen 3 stock system. So one of the little offshoot projects I've done from my AR-15 project, my AR-15 lower project, was I did some stocks, so some fixed stock designs. And I spent quite a bit of time trying to work out making those ergonomic and aesthetically pleasing to match my lower receivers. And I did that, I released that, and then I kind of took that and I used a very similar design for the stock on the Orca. And I kind of took those, that's kind of, I guess the origins of those aesthetics was from that stock project. And then the Orca kind of went from there. The original intention of the Orca, my original design was very different than the current one. But I kind of got into the concept for the current Orca with the split upper and lower that kind of tab together from the front, and the blended, very smooth look just kind of came naturally as the best way to do it with 3D printing.
Interesting, because when I look at it, it almost reminds me of something from like a classic car that has fins from the 60s where there's not a straight line on it.
I love classic cars from the 60s.
Okay, so my man Hoffman Tactical's got some classic car.
So definitely maybe a little inspiration there.
A little bit of inspiration, because I'm just thinking, this looks like it would be wielded by some like aquatic diver in the 60s going down, searching for creatures in very deep depths of the ocean.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
It's a really unique looking firearm. I've never seen anything quite like it, and I think it's just so amazing that this is something that it's 3D printable and you can't get it any other way.
Yeah, and that's another aspect of it is that it is 3D printed, so that allows me to do different design techniques. So a lot of traditional firearms have a very particular aesthetic, very particular ergonomics, and that is a lot of that is due to the manufacturing methods used. They're using most of it. Most firearms are done with machining, so subtractive machining, and just due to the types of tools used and the process itself, it's very cost effective to do things with straight lines, flat surfaces, all of that. It saves a lot of time and money when machining. With 3D printing, that's not the case. Rounded, smooth surfaces are actually better because it keeps things running smoother. You don't have to accelerate and deaccelerate the tool
more
head.
gradual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So because of that, I'm just trying to design for manufacture. So designing for the equipment which we're going to be using rather than just arbitrarily trying to go with an aesthetic or a design that's intended for subtractive.
That's something I didn't really take into account when looking at it, but it just lends itself to the way of producing it more than any other design out there, I would say, because it's just, yeah, you're right, there's not a straight line, and that's for a reason, but also it's an aesthetic reason too, but it's like more secondary. Because I've always noticed that your designs are, and primarily most people who 3D print guns, like Ivan similar, most people who develop and design firearms in this space, it's functionality over everything, and
Absolutely.
the aesthetics comes second.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, the functionality was the big part. The aesthetics, there was no downside to doing that. There was only benefits to making everything smooth. So that the obviously it prints better. It's more ergonomic, and also blending things like that reduces stress risers as well. So it helps distribute stresses better, and that's all just part of just, if there's no downside, you might as well do it. It takes longer, but it's worth it.
How long did that project take you to complete?
It took around 6 months.
Oh wow, it's pretty not that long.
Yeah, I think actual start date to when it was released was closer to. I have it written down, but it was somewhere like 8 months. It's on my Instagram somewhere. I did a post on it, but there was some off time and on time there. I started it earlier in 2022 and then released it January 2023. So it was probably around 8-9 months total. But yeah, probably like 6 months of actually working on it. So it wasn't that bad. It was a relatively quick project.
Yeah, the reaction to it from people when I first posted on my story was just like, everyone was like, "Oh my God, what is that? That is so cool!" Or it was like, and I was thinking most people might be like, "Oh, it's cursed," but the reaction was like overwhelmingly, "That is amazing. That's beautiful." Garantham DM'd me and was like, "Gib," and I was like, "Oh man, Hoffman Tactical coming out with another banger." And it's just so cool to see your mind as a designer take the whole gun as a way to, approaching it as designing the whole gun as opposed to just the lower, because
that was a very interesting aspect of it, is I had a lot more design freedom. Obviously it is still an AR-15, and I was still designing it around an AR-15 components and everything, but doing the entire gun compared to just the lower opens up a lot more design choices and allows you to make a lot more customizations and decisions while designing, and that was super, super cool.
Do you think you'll do anything else that's like a complete gun in the future?
Variations of the Orca, yes. As far as other firearms, possibly some more like fully die firearms, or probably not. The Orca is obviously still like a parts kits gun. It's still an AR-15.
Yeah.
So it would be very cool to try some more unique projects that are, just kind of from the ground up builds. Probably more for like the fully die, fully do it yourself, fully DIY type setup. But for now, there's quite a bit of different variations of the Orca, which I could do, which would be really cool. That would still be the same basic firearm, but different calibers, different mags, different accessories.
Gotcha. So it seems like you've been working in this AR space, and that is kind of like your wheelhouse, right?
Yes, yeah. The AR is all I've really worked on, actually. That's kind of my primary thing. So I understand it, and it's, so I'm able to work around it. It would be interesting to branch out, but for now I've kind of stuck with the AR world.
What do you think about some of the other projects in the 3D printed gun space? Like, for example, Suckboy Tony, what he's doing is really unique. What do you think about like the future of using 3D printed in this kind of space of, personal defense, things like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it kind of branches out in a few different areas. Kind of, I think the basic underlying concept here is accessible defense or accessible weapon systems, weapons platforms. So distributed weapon systems. So not millions of dollars, but systems that anyone can build. I think that's kind of the basic underlying part, and 3D printing is obviously a big part of that right now. So I think it can kind of go in a couple different directions, and I think it should. So one way, obviously, is increasing accessibility, which is making things easier to manufacture without needing firearms components. So here in the United States, it's very easy for us to buy barrels, bolts, all of that stuff, without regulation. Other countries, it's more difficult. So I think doing like along what Suckboy Tony is doing, he's even making his own ammunition. I think that's very cool, especially as the ammunition aspect. So like I think taking that project like a step further and continuing to develop it's his plasma pump rifle. If those listening don't know, it's basically
It's 50 cal, right?
Yeah, it's 50 cal. It shoots 3D printed ammunition. He's cast lead bullets. The shells are all 3D printing, disintegrated casings, black powder.
Crazy.
All basically, there's no firearms components. It's quite low cost, and it can be made anywhere with just common materials. It doesn't require any firearms parts at all. So that is, I think, one very interesting direction that we're definitely going in. They're going to continue to go in, especially the homemade ammunition aspect. I think that can be refined so that it's reliable and very effective. So I'm really stoked about where that's going. And then the other direction would be kind of trying to increase capability. So more like heavier weapons. Some of the more of the stuff like Wild Arms Research and Development is doing with their rocket launchers and that stuff, which is super cool.
That stuff is insane. This guy, if you're not familiar, Wild Arms Research and Development has one of the coolest projects going where he develops rocket launchers, and it utilizes 3D printing and just DIY stuff. And that is mind-blowing to me, and the amount of engineering and development that he puts into that, and just research is unreal. And you should check out his YouTube as well, and check out his Instagram stuff. It's just mind-blowing. I saw he had like four, like a quad kind of.
Yeah, that's so he does quite a few like recreations of vintage weapon systems, and so that was one of them. He did the
Fliegerfaust, right?
The Fliegerfaust. So I think it was the Fliegerfaust, which is like a 6-barreled rocket launcher.
Yep.
And that was, I believe, It was a German 6-barreled anti-aircraft rocket launcher, which was only ever experimental, and he recreated it. So that was quite the project he did. And he's done some other really cool stuff, some very interesting development with rocket engines, which is not an easy subject if you ever worked with them. It's solid fuel rockets can get very complicated very quickly, and especially the bigger ones. So that, I think, is a really interesting area. A big challenge there, though, is the regulation in that area.
Yeah.
Hampers development, makes it difficult to do legally. So that is a big challenge, I think, that we face in that direction. But I think it's still an important direction to pursue. So we kind of have two different aspects of distributed weapons, homemade weapons. I don't know if that's a particularly good word to use. Might have bad connections, but distributed weapon systems can kind of go accessibility and then performance. And obviously they're discrete, but they can overlap, obviously. So those are kind of I'm trying to decide which one is more important to work on right now, and they're both really, really interesting.
Yeah, wow. Speaking of accessibility, we've now seen the FGC-9 Mark II, the latest version, being used by rebels in Myanmar fighting the military dictatorship there. What are your thoughts on that whole conflict and seeing 3D printed weapon systems in use?
I think it's a perfect example of why distributed weapon systems are so important, because less powerful oppressed groups can use them to defend themselves and to regain their freedom, or at least try to. Compared to otherwise when they would simply be massacred or genocided. So I think that's really a prime example of 3D printed guns and just distributed systems in general. and how much good they can do.
I see it as definitely a pretty clear-cut example of horrible atrocities being
Yeah.
conducted by military dictatorship. So I'm all for them being able to defend themselves, and the fact that they're using 3D printing to do that is pretty unprecedented, pretty amazing.
It is.
And Jay Stark,
So I really never heard of him until near his arrest.
interesting.
So I never really interacted with him at all. I just know that he was the guy behind the FGC9. He was a really big part of that.
Yeah.
And then obviously his arrest and then his passing away under very suspicious circumstances in Germany. So I think he's a good example of a designer who was very motivated to produce a good product.
Yeah. Did you watch the Popular Front doc on him?
Yeah, that was I did back when it came out.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty well done.
Yeah, same. I'm definitely. I will say that was one of the big factors big pieces of media that got me really intrigued into the space. And then watching Control Pew. If you're not familiar with Control Pew, also another big personality / creator, provider of information in the 3D printing space. So, yeah, I think Jay Stark's legacy and just his philosophy and the thoughts he had on people just wanting to, being able to give people a chance to defend themselves against tyranny is a very important message that, unfortunately, people who just look at that doc, a lot of people would probably just think, oh, this guy's a terrorist or something, because he's got a mask and stuff, which, it's just people not understanding. But, rest in peace to him, and his efforts are definitely making waves across the world.
Yes.
In many ways. Also, Ivan also worked on that project too,
Yes.
on both Mark 1 and Mark 2. We talked a little bit about the future of kind of where you see maybe this going, but what I wanted to talk with you about how you think AI might influence modern warfare or warfare in the future, and is there anything that you think that the DIY space will have that will develop maybe to either counter it or use it in the way of defense? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. So as far as countering, I don't really know. That'll probably be more. I mean, it depends how it's instituted into weapon systems. But as far as utilizing it, I think that it has huge potential in distributed low-cost weapons. Just as guidance systems and stuff like that. More traditional weapons rely on basically brute force. Massive amounts of explosives and just basically the brute force, massive blast. We're talking about artillery, stuff like that. Heavier weapons with a proper AI powered guidance system. That can basically fly a small quadcopter or control a turret like a human would. I think that could be done once the software is developed. That can be done very low cost and make for extremely effective, basically low cost force multipliers. So autonomous systems. So I think that has a huge potential in the future for distributed low cost weapons.
I guess taking it back to the evidence table thing. Do you ever worry about someone doing something horrible with?
Certainly. So I mean, I worry about people doing things horrible. Just period. Whether they use my particular designs or not isn't really a huge concern of mine. I mean, it's the act itself, not the tool they do. So not the tool they use. So so far, I don't think any of my designs have been used in crimes, as far as I know. Obviously, people have been arrested, but it's never for any actual legitimate crime, really. It's for just the possession of that firearm. So absolutely, I think that is something that is concerning, but not strictly because it's one of my guns, just because acts of violence are concerning in and of themselves.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, I don't design them, but I have the same kind of philosophy about people watch my content and things like that. It's the people doing the bad stuff, not the content or the video games or the firearm that they use.
Exactly, yeah.
I guess going back to the AI thing, I'm curious, have you played around with any of the Chat GPT or the GPT-4 stuff?
Yeah, so I did try out Chat GPT a little bit. I didn't find it particularly useful because it is pretty locked down, and it won't and all of the information that that is hard to find elsewhere, it won't help you with. So because of that, I didn't find it particularly useful, but I do think it has potential. But that type of system, I don't think would be the type that would not be the type of AI you'd be seeing in weapon systems. It would probably more of a bare bones type guidance, navigation type systems, I think is what you're going to see in a lot of weapon systems.
Do you think, though, with the amount of information out there, READMEs, STLs, G code, step files, especially, and all of these files, if AI could pool from all of the 3D printed gun files and analyze them?
Do you think it could design guns of its own?
Yeah.
I think there's potential there, but I don't see a particular need for it. As in, the information. I think if it had enough accurate information to be trained on, and that's more information that's out there available on the internet right now, I think it could be useful. But I would definitely look forward to seeing that. But I think that I really don't know actually how much potential that would have. That's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, because we've seen, like, if it gets enough data and it has enough processing computing power, it can do insane things that humans can do, and create things essentially from those data points, and using that data to inform itself what it might make or whatever.
It's quite interesting. I think that the biggest challenge would be trying to communicate what you want with the system. So basically telling it what you want the final result to look like and what you want it to do, because obviously you don't want to just design something random. You want it to have a certain goal for a particular mission. So I think that communication would be the most challenging aspect of it.
Yeah. And I think you're probably right that there isn't quite enough data in the open gun design space to feed it.
It would require a group that really knew what they were doing to collect the information, and then put it in a digestible format, and then teach the learning model with that information.
Yeah, it's happening so fast, and I think we're on the verge of a massive shift in terms of how the world works with the level of AI that's being developed now.
Yeah, so I look forward to becoming more accessible, more open source solutions and such.
Are you ever at all concerned about the potential dangers of it? Or?
Oh yes, not in the open source side, but being abused by governments and large organizations. Absolutely,
we've seen that with facial recognition and stuff.
I think it's a huge concern. Yes.
Yeah. See, that's where I wonder with the DIY space. Like, is there a place now, kind of like in the future, where defense will be not necessarily just firearms, but it will be combating those systems,
Yes. So, that depends what those systems look like, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
But, obviously the most important thing to understand about AI is it's simply a brain. It's just a control system. So it's absolutely worthless without some way of interacting with the world. Be that a learning model, and then, giving you designs, giving you images, or actually, interacting with a turret system or something. That is really that's a very important aspect of it. So how it's used is very important, how you counteract it. And I really don't know what that looks like.
All right. Well, shifting the conversation to something a little bit more light. I'm just curious what your life outside of your 3D printing, Hoffman tactical personality. It seems like you're on the farm a lot in your videos. You live in a pretty rural spot, right? Yeah,
very rural. Well, used to be more rural, less rural now, but yeah, still very rural. And yes, on a farm. So
and you like to be barefoot on the farm.
Yes, I actually don't do feet pics, so I'm not going to show you my feet.
Darn.
But I actually I rarely wear shoes. It's you should try it sometime. It's healthy, invigorating, and your tactical response time really increases when you don't have to put your boots on.
Wow, you heard it from the man himself. That's the ethos. So, how long have you been doing that?
Barefoot?
Yeah.
Oh, my entire life.
Wow. So do you have like some pretty like calloused, like very like your feet must be able to? I know we might be getting a little too personal, but I'm just curious because like when I walk on like pebbles and stuff, I'm like, damn, that hurts. That hurts.
It hurts every time.
Oh, it still hurts.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
No, your
'Cause
feet get a lot tougher, but no, running on gravel is always unpleasant. You just kind of get used to it, and you have to work on your foot placement and all that those fine details, which all you shoe wearing people just don't even realize exist.
wow, it's another dimension.
Exactly.
Damn,
Whole
Hoffman
new
Tactical.
world.
Damn, I have to take that advice and get these little soft dogs a little bit hardened and get them nice and ready to go for the gravel.
Yes, gotta work on that.
Yeah.
Just find a lot with some nice sub 1 inch gravel and get to it.
Damn.
The big gravel can be damaging. You have to be careful with it.
Yeah,
the big stones.
Scuff yourself up.
Yeah, but that little gravel, yeah,
Do you find the grip to be decent with a bare feet, or?
depends on the surface.
Ah,
Yeah, wet grass can be problematic. But that's true really for most shoes once you have spikes. So
true.
cleats are actually quite handy in some situations. I will admit.
Damn, some 3D printed cleats maybe.
Actually, I have not thought of that, but that is an interesting concept. They would be
Interesting.
plenty tough, I'd say.
Yeah, you could implement it into a light sandal of some kind, maybe.
Yeah, 3D printed shoes are actually a growing industry.
Yeah.
That, I do find interesting. Custom fitted 3D printed shoes. So
Well, I mean, you started out by doing like the covers for the Ear Pro, and that's kind of something you can wear.
exactly. So I've done the wearables. So yeah, 3D printed shoes.
Yeah, fashion designer, Hoffman Tactical, maybe sometime in the future, right?
Yes, exactly.
You mentioned that you like 60s cars. Is there a specific car that you liked from the 60s?
Not really. I know almost nothing about cars. Definitely not a car guy. But I just, in general, don't like the direction that modern cars are going in. So too much crumple zone.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. The grill, the massive grills.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with federal regulation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because you'll notice most cars nowadays are the same. There's very little variation.
Yeah.
And it's hard to believe that that's organic. So it's I think a lot of it has to do with regulation, safety regulation, which is another good example of why these big overreaching governments are bad. So we have a lot less choice in the consumer market now as far as vehicles.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier about JDM cars and how we have this 25-year rule, which you didn't know about, but we have a 25-year rule where you can't import any car from any country outside of the U.S. unless it's 25 years old or older. So right now, as we do this podcast, you can import any vehicle made after April 11th, 1998. So if it was made after that, can't. If it's made before that, can.
Which is just a ridiculous rule. Like, come on, guys.
Absurd, yeah. And I think there's a few different reasons for it. But now in most cars after 1998 had airbags. So it's not really about safety, I don't think. I think it's just more about wanting people to buy cars, new cars.
In the U.S., which is fine, except that as consumers, as a consumer, I'm very dissatisfied with the option of cars available in this country. So
Yeah. Would you drive a right-hand drive car?
I've never done it before, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Sounds a little weird, but I mean,
Speaking of having those opportunities, have you ever been out of the country?
never have. No,
Never have been out of the country.
never have.
Wow. Do you desire to go travel at all?
Maybe so in Europe. So another big issue of the U.S. A little bit off topic, but a big problem in the U.S. is hydrogen is hard to get on the consumer market, specifically for ballooning. So gas ballooning is a big thing in Europe. It should be a big thing in the U.S., but due to our backwards and I don't know if I should use the R word on the podcast, but our backwards. Some of our strange backwards social beliefs and social aspects of our U.S. culture. For some reason, we don't do gas ballooning because we think it's dangerous or something. So
Hot air ballooning?
Gas ballooning.
Gas
So
ballooning.
hot air ballooning obviously is hot air. Gas is using a lighter than air gas like hydrogen primarily or helium.
Whoa.
And in the U.S., it's very, very expensive. There's like a dozen guys that do it. It's ridiculously small.
No way.
In Europe, in Germany in particular, they have hydrogen pipelines which go right to the ballooning fields. They just hook up, open the valve, and boom, like dirt cheap hydrogen. So if you wanted to learn how to gas balloon, going to Europe would be a big thing.
Sounds like that's something you want to do.
Yes. So if I want to learn to gas balloon, I'm going to have to go to Europe. So I definitely have interest in
So
that.
has it been a just more reluctance to have to go other place outside of the U.S.?
I just hate the whole passport system. I think it's the stupidest thing in the world. Let's go back to to 1905. We can just get in the boat and go.
Yeah.
So I just don't like it, and I don't like to participate in things I don't like. But it's not that bad.
So you might, if I twisted your arm, go on a trip outside of the U.S. somewhere.
If it included ballooning, yes.
If it included,
Yes.
damn,
Even hot air ballooning. So I've heard that Turkey has some really good hot air ballooning.
interesting.
In,
Now, have you ever been up in a balloon?
Never have, no.
Damn. So this is something that you've never experienced, but you're willing to take part in the.
Oh, I know.
passport.
I'll love it. I mean, I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Everyone should. If you don't, that's weird.
but you've never been in a balloon.
I've never been in a balloon. No.
Wow, so that's got to happen. I think we got to get Hoffman Tactical up in a balloon. So if you're out there and you do any kind of ballooning,
Let me know.
Please,
Yes.
yeah, holler at
I
Hoffman.
will travel. So, yes.
Maybe outside of the U.S., especially
Yes.
outside the U.S. if it's hydrogen.
Yeah. If it's a gas balloon, it's going to have to be outside the U.S. just because.
Yeah, so little.
The cost of gas balloon in the U.S. is shocking.
Yeah.
Just unbelievably high.
Yeah. Speaking of things that are hard to get in the U.S., this is taking it back to the firearms thing, but tell me about the story of how you got your Barrett, because and just why you. I believe you last time you said the only gun that you have that's not your concealed carry piece, that's a firearm that's bought over the counter, is a Barrett. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, it's the only gun I've purchased. It's the only over-the-counter gun I've purchased. So,
You just took it to 50 cal Barrett. Just
yeah, I mean, we can print the smaller ones, so why buy them?
That's incredible. So tell me about the story of when you got it, how you got that.
Yeah, so I guess most people don't know this. I've never really done any content in my Barrett,
No.
which is weird.
Why not?
I don't know. I just haven't really felt that it's on brand. Like
It's a
there's
little bit
so
of-
much 50 cal content out there.
He's too humble.
Yeah, I don't want to try to show off or something. That looks. I don't want to make people upset.
Well, we might have to do that tomorrow. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get the Barrett out tomorrow. Have some fun with it. It is a really fun gun to shoot. So I always wanted a 50 caliber. I think it's a really important rifle. I think that 50 calibers, every firearms owner should own one. They should be lower cost. They should be more accessible. And that's a product I like. I think 3D Arms. Did you see his Slam Fire 50?
Yes.
So that is a very, very fun project he's working on. And I would like to see more do-it-yourself 50 calibers. Obviously, it's a challenging caliber. It's very large, very high power. There's a lot of recoil and there aren't really any parts. You can get barrels, that's about it. So you got to make your own bolts. And the barrels themselves are around $500 or so for a basic barrel. So they're expensive too. But I think that with the right market, I think that 50 calibers could be a lot cheaper. I think that should be the case because everyone needs an anti-vehicle rifle. That's why I got it. So
when did you get? If you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you got that?
that would have been actually I think I would have been 20. So
20 years old, and the first gun that
or
you
19.
purchased.
I don't know if it was 19 or 20, but yeah.
Your first gun purchase, Barrett 50 cal, and it's the full size.
It's the long barrel. So yes, those little 20-inch CQB Barretts, I just don't get them. They're weird.
That is incredible, dude.
Yeah, so it's everybody needs a 50 cal. You can write that down, focus on it, make it a life point, and sell the motorcycle, get the 50 cal. So
Life advice from Tim Hoffman. Wow. Okay, that's amazing. I mean, I have to do this because it's the thing to talk about. But what do you think about this war in Ukraine and
Oh yeah, so that is actually a good topic. I don't know if we want to put it in the podcast because it might be too controversial. But in general, I don't follow it too closely. I think it's mostly political, and I don't think that it's so clear cut as good and bad. I think it's more of a political war with a lot of faults on both sides. The U.S. has interest in one side, Russia has interest in the other. So it's kind of a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia.
I find it fascinating looking at all of the footage and the drone footage and stuff. It's brutal a lot of the times, but it's just unprecedented that a war is happening with this style of warfare.
It is interesting the way it's being done, and I'm actually I'm surprised a lot of times at what I see and how long the war has taken, and with all the modern tools and weapons available, I'm surprised at how much of a ground war it is. If you had asked me before it started, I would have said that that style of warfare was obsolete, but people are still using tanks, which surprises me. How dragged out the war is, I would have expected a more decisive outcome for one side or the other, or just a lot. I don't know. It just seems like with all the modern guidance systems, rocket systems, aircraft systems, the style of the war has surprised me a little bit, and I haven't really followed it closely enough to get into details. But it's just not something I would have expected. I would have thought that there would be a lot more very quick, massive mass destruction, and then that would be that.
Same. On the side of Ukraine, like holding the entire Russian army back seems like something I never would have expected to happen.
Exactly. It seems, I'm not even sure why or what the details there are. There's a lot of very enthusiastic pro-Ukraine or pro-Russia stuff out there. So I think that propaganda is actually a possibility. I don't know. Some people would get very upset when I said that. But I'm not entirely convinced that we have the best source of information for what's going on. So I'm always a little skeptical of everything I see. But yeah, that surprises me. That the weakness of aircraft systems is something which I wouldn't really have expected. Due to ground to air anti-aircraft systems appear to be very effective.
Yeah.
Which is something that is not something you've seen in the past. Aircraft have normally been the thing, but it seems like that's not so much the case. And that has been interesting, I think. And as well as just, the lack of aggression on Russia's part has been interesting. And
I mean, it seems like they're trying, though. It seems like they are.
They're like kind of trying, but then they're not really. Like I would think they would have done a lot more. I mean, if I was in charge and I wanted to win, I would be deploying small nukes. I don't know.
Oh God.
But it just seems like, I don't know. It's a weird conflict. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it's almost like Russia views it as their territory, so they don't necessarily want to nuke their own.
Exactly. I think that has a lot to do with it, and that's something that I haven't really seen discussed so much. But like as if they want to try to minimize collateral damage. And I know there is a lot of stuff about collateral damage and civilian casualties and stuff, which is probably the case. That's the way these wars go, unfortunately. But yeah, I feel like that is part of it. That Russia doesn't want to. They want to reintegrate Ukraine. They don't want to destroy it.
Yeah.
So I think that has a lot to do with them holding back. But then again, that seems like a difficult way to fight a war as well.
Yeah.
So I think they could be kind of trying to be careful, and that's why they're having so much trouble, because they're trying to reduce damage. But once again, the information we get it's hard to really see what's going on then with that more detailed aspects of it.
Yeah. Speaking of which, talking about wars, which wars sucks.
And the worst part is how avoidable so many of wars are.
Agreed.
There's just so little need for so many wars.
Agreed. Yeah. Arguably, there's never a need for war.
That's true, yes.
But wars get started, and unfortunately, a lot of destruction happens. We've heard people in certain governments, I'm not going to say who, but say that, you don't need a personal defense weapon like AR-15 because the government has nuclear weapons and F-15s.
Yes.
What do you think of that concept?
So that is a very interesting concept, and it's the resistance is futile concept, basically, is what that is. And I think that the problem with it is that large, heavy weapon systems have to have a target, and you can't target a civilian population practically. I mean, you can just nuke your entire country, but that's kind of
counterproductive.
Yeah, that's not really a very effective tool, and that would be a challenging thing to do, actually. To get authorization to do that would probably be impossible. I certainly hope it's impossible.
Yeah.
But difficult, if nothing else. Yeah, so, I mean, that's basically it. A civilian population, if the need arose, they're not trying to attack a foreign country, overseas. They're trying to resist local tyranny, which in most cases involves troops on the ground. And drone aircraft, that kind of thing. So I think there should be a focus on anti-drone equipment and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That gets a little spicier, but I think that should be kind of a part of decentralized defense systems.
Now, speaking of kind of like insurgencies, what do you think about the way that the Afghan people have been able to defend their country over the last whatever 50 to 100
Yeah,
years
so
against all of these different powers?
that keep coming after them. So I think part of it has to do with the invading powers seem to have very limited goals. Like I'm not even sure what their objective is. Like the U.S. Obviously occupied that area for a long time, and the objective was never it's a police action, right? Officially,
Yeah.
so the objective was never understood. So I'm not. If there's no goal, it's hard to judge how effective they were. But I think that is if you look at it simply from like a police action standpoint, so the occupying forces were not trying to genocide everybody in the country. That wasn't their goal. They were trying to exert control, and in that situation, it shows you how effective small arms are, because massive aircraft and bombs and such are only so useful against a distributed, non-central.
Fighting force.
Exactly.
Yeah. Completely.
Whose only interest is in trying to just get you out.
Yes. And they've been very effective at that.
Very
Against
effective.
the Soviets, the British, and us.
Yes. For over a very long period of time. Obviously, it was hard. They had lots of casualties and all of that.
Yeah.
But they're still there. So
Fascinating. I find that fascinating.
Yes.
And also tragic to see all of the people that lost their lives on both sides in that conflict. And now where it's at today with just the same thing being back to normal.
yeah. Well, there's always ulterior motives there.
There always is.
It's always about there's money involved, or there's some politician has some motivation to authorize that action.
As we get close to the end here, I just want to talk to you about the firearms industry and being a firearms designer yourself and getting into it in kind of a alternative way.
Yes.
What's your take on the firearms industry now currently? Like, is there anything that you see as being cool or innovative? Is there any projects that you like? Are there any like manufacturers that you're more paying attention to? Or?
So not really, actually. I mean, it's just kind of I keep an eye on general things. I haven't really. I mean, there's some interesting stuff, but nothing like that super stands out. I think that a big problem I see a lot of stuff is trying to appeal to law enforcement and military. Obviously, I personally don't like that. I mean, nothing wrong with selling to them if it's legitimate, but that's something that never impresses me. I see a lot of companies doing that, bigger companies, and then other than that, I think probably mostly due to the very aggressive regulation we have in this country, not as much as Europe, obviously, but the very aggressive regulation we have on firearms, the National Firearms Act and other things like that. It's difficult for the firearms industry to innovate because the legal civilian firearms is such a tiny selection of what is possible. If you look at all the firearms out there, a semi-automatic firearm with a 16-inch plus barrel, has to be rifled, all of that. All of those restrictions, on suppressors, dangerous devices, I think that really makes it difficult to innovate in this space, and I think that's a big part of it. So that's why we see a lot of firearms are just kind of the same old. There's the firearms now are very similar to the firearms 50 years ago. Obviously, that statement is not true in many, many cases. But as far as if you're looking at it in a very general way, there hasn't been that much change.
Unless you 3D print them and make them look like
Unless you
aquatic
3D print them.
mammals.
Yes. 3D printing, I think, can do we'll be doing some very interesting stuff in that area that other manufacturers are scared to do or just unwilling to do.
Yeah. One thing I've been very impressed with is your commitment to filament testing and material testing.
Yeah, so that is something I would like to work on more. I've only kind of just done some very, very basic, like kind of surface stuff on filament testing and trying to understand the structural properties of 3D prints. It's really important when designing products to understand the different mechanical properties of 3D printed items. So that's kind of why I've done work in that area. Testing layer adhesion and strength with different materials and print settings and such. I would like to work on that more, but it's a very time-consuming thing that requires a very focused, organized effort. So because of that, I don't do it nearly as much as I'd like to.
Is there anything else you'd like to add or talk about?
Nothing that I think would be appropriate for the podcast.
Yeah.
We could, we could talk about airships all night, but I don't think that's
balloons.
I don't think. Yeah, well, balloons, airships, lighter than air.
Yeah, lighter than air balloons that drop maybe some tactical nukes here and there.
Potentially, exactly, potentially.
Awesome. Well, Tim, it's been an absolute joy to have you as the first guest on the podcast. I hope that I can do more of these podcasts, but I'm just very honored to be doing this with you.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think it's a good format. We have a great podcast studio here, obviously, you can see behind me. And I've really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Now, as my very first guest on this podcast, I wanted to gift you something because I think it's awesome that you're the first one, and I just appreciate with what you do and you coming down here. So, one sec, I'm going to grab it.
He's going to grab something.
All right, so this is my PSR 15 upper receiver, and it is one of the early ones. And it's got my logo, and it's completely raw aluminum, very cyberpunk. And as my first guest, and it's actually got these 3D printed sights on here. And I wanted to give this to you as a token of respect and admiration, and thanks for coming to the podcast.
Wow, thank you. That's quite impressive. I saw when you came out with these, and they're quite cool. Quite a collectible little item here, actually.
Yeah. So
that's
there you go.
I'm honored to have one.
My pleasure. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who watched, and thank you to everyone who listened. Hopefully I'll somehow get a chance to put this on Spotify. We'll see. But if it's just on YouTube at first, then thanks for everyone for watching on YouTube, and of course Odyssey and all of the other places. You can never find Tim's designs on the Odyssey if you Google the Odyssey or Google Hoffman Tactical.
Yeah, definitely don't do that. Google is not your friend here.
Yeah, never do that. And with that said, that is it for episode 1 of the PSR podcast. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.